think this should be working. Oh, I'll just change that. So lovely, nice to meet you all. I'm so sorry, I do not speak Japanese, and so this webinar today will be in English, but you can just look at it as like an IELTS listening test or something like this. My name is Andy, and I am the regional director for a group of schools in the UK called MPW, and I am based in our Hong Kong office. Every application from Asia, non-China, will go through our Hong Kong office, and that of course includes Japan. And so thank you very much for attending my talk today, which is going to be 10 tips for applying to top ranking universities. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so first tip, choose your A-level subjects carefully. Now, I do realize that this tip, it may not apply to everybody because not everybody is considering A-levels in the UK. But just in case you are, I think this should be tip number one. Okay, so taking certain A-level subjects, it's going to open up more university options to you. That's just the way it is. And you're going to hear about something called facilitating subjects. That's a pretty good word, facilitating subjects. Facilitating subjects, these are the subjects which are the most commonly required, preferred, or respected by the top ranking universities to get onto courses. Now, facilitating subjects is actually old now. It no longer exists officially, and it's been replaced with something called informed choices. And the reason that they replaced facilitating subjects with informed choices is because facilitating subjects didn't really allow for students who wanted to study subjects such as art and design or performing arts, things like this. And so they have updated it with something called informed choices. But the reason I'm still going to talk about facilitating subjects as tip number one is because I still think it applies in many ways. You've got to remember that at the top ranking universities, a lot of the academics have worked there for 20, 30, 40 years, okay? And so even though facilitating subjects has now been officially been replaced by informed choices, unofficially, I still think facilitating subjects will still apply to some extent or another. And so the Russell Group previously defined facilitating subjects as English literature, history, modern languages, that would be things like French, German, Spanish, and so forth, classical languages such as ancient Greek or Latin. I don't think I've come across an international student yet in my time who has studied ancient Greek or Latin. Of course, maths and further maths, the sciences, physics, biology, chemistry, geography. Now, A-levels are a lot more difficult than GCSEs, and so this is something that you must bear in mind. And GCSEs is kind of almost like the US system in some ways, where you will actually study a broad range of subjects, but in a lot less depth. A-levels are the complete opposite, where you will study far less subjects, but in much more detail. And so A-levels are really suitable for students if you know what subject you want to study at university, because then you can focus on the subjects which are relevant and the subjects which are of interest to you. Now, if you do poorly on a GCSE subject, GCSEs are like the middle school qualification in the UK. And if you do badly on a GCSE subject, then it's guaranteed you will do badly on that subject at A-levels. But having said that, just because you get a good grade at a GCSE subject does not necessarily guarantee that you will get a good grade at A-level, because remember, they are a lot more difficult than GCSEs. Now, certain university courses will look for specific A-levels, of course. And so courses such as medicine, dentistry, vet science, chemistry is always essential. And usually they will ask for at least one from biology, maths, and physics. Economics, maths usually is essential. It's very, very rare that you actually need economics A-level to study economics at university. But maths would, of course, be the important one. Law. The good news about law is that there are no essential subjects required for law, although universities do like subjects which show like logical thinking ability and the ability to write. And so you could consider, for example, a mixture of arts and science subjects, but there are no subjects which are actually required, which is the good thing about law. Computing. Maths is essential for a few, but certainly useful for all. Remember, if you're interested in studying computing science at university, a lot of that is based on coding, and maths is very, very important for that. Engineering, maths, and physics are usually essential. Further maths is often preferred, certainly at the high-ranking universities. And if you're interested in studying something like chemical engineering, then chemistry is usually essential as well. Okay, so some courses and universities may have lists of subjects that they don't accept. And so LSE, they certainly had a list of non-preferred subjects, and they included accounting, art and design, business, DT, which is design technology, drama, film studies, health and social care, ICT. Do not confuse A-levels and ICT with computing science. And so ICT tends to focus a lot more on the hardware, things like the graphics card, the processor, the motherboard, how it all comes together to form a computer. Whereas computing science is a lot more about coding, usually Python, possibly C++, JavaScript, things like this, okay? And so it's worth looking at university websites when making decisions, just to check that they do not have lists of non-preferred subjects. Now, I get asked this question sometimes. Are there any easy A-levels, Andy, which I can do to almost guarantee an A or an A star? I would say not really, not nowadays. And so going back maybe say 10 years ago, I would say though there were some A-level subjects which could be considered easier than the others. But actually, I don't really think there are any A-level subjects which are that easy nowadays. Even things like media, I think, are actually, certainly more difficult than what they were maybe 10 years ago. But there certainly are some subjects which are traditionally more difficult for international students to do. And I would say those subjects include English language, English literature, modern languages, classical languages, history, geography, biology, psychology, and economics. Okay, so these subjects often employ quite complex vocabulary. And so therefore, international students do find them quite challenging. Even domestic students will find these subjects quite challenging. And so if you want to do any of these subjects, certainly you have to have very, very competent levels of English, and you need to be very confident in articulating your thoughts in English, both speaking and writing. Having said all of this, look, this is the most important advice of all when choosing subjects to study. The number one rule above anything else is you should only choose subjects that you enjoy and only choose subjects that you're good at. Okay, that is the overriding advice above anything else. There are many times when I come across a student, for example, asking me about studying medicine. And I ask them, what are their least favorite subjects in school? And they will say, oh, my least favorite is chemistry and biology. I really don't like science subjects. And I just think, why do you want to study medicine if you don't enjoy chemistry? Usually it's because of pressure, maybe from their family or parents, but you really should only choose subjects that you enjoy and that you're good at. Because if you don't, you're likely to struggle, become unhappy, and it never works out well. Okay, so tip number 2, research your university. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, so a lot of students are interested in going to Oxford or Cambridge University simply because they're #1 ranking, super, super famous universities, right? But you've got to ask yourself, what is Oxbridge actually like? And is it suitable for you? Okay, so Oxford and Cambridge, they are built around something called the tutorial system, also known as supervisions in Cambridge, but known as tutorials in Oxford. And tutorials, they could be one-to-one sessions or small groups, and they're very, very discussion-based. And so one thing you need to remember is that tutors in places like not just Oxbridge, but really any high-ranking university, they are often highly specialized world experts in their subject area. And so you've got to be extremely confident in articulating your thoughts in these tutorials. Oxford and Cambridge are 2 of only 3 universities in the UK that have something called the collegiate system. It's a very old-fashioned system. The 3rd university that has the collegiate system in the UK is Durham University, which is in the very northeast of England. Oxford and Cambridge are the other 2. And so Oxbridge, they are comprised of several independent, self-governing colleges. Okay, and so this basically allows students to, 1, belong to a large famous institution, such as Oxford or Cambridge University, but 2 belong to a smaller academic community, because how it works in places like Oxbridge is students will usually socialize with other students from within that college that they are attending. The terms are shorter and more intensive at Oxbridge, and so that basically equates to more work and more pressure. Therefore, a lot of independent reading and research is expected of Oxbridge students. And because the terms are shorter, it means tight deadlines. Of course, extracurricular activities are possible, but it just means you require careful time management because the terms are shorter. And because it is so intensive, your workloads will be heavy. So just be careful when doing extracurricular activities, but certainly I would encourage that. In fact, I think it's an important thing to do, but just manage your time carefully if you are doing this. I personally wouldn't really recommend part-time work if you are attending Oxbridge, just because there is so much work to do. Although I do accept some students, they have to work part-time, right? Just to earn a little bit of extra pocket money, that's fine. And due to the intensity of the workload, this is not suitable for everybody. And so it's something you must consider when choosing your universities. Now, things that you really should think about, which I think are very important when making a decision about the university to attend, would be things like, for example, the city. I think this is a really important factor to consider. Ask yourself this question: do you like big, busy cities or small, quieter cities? If you don't like the city that you're based in, it's inevitable that you will become unhappy, and unhappy students do not study well, right? Think about what the subject teaches or specializes in, okay? So there are certain, for example, if you're interested in economics, something like LSE is world famous for this, or if you're interested in something like engineering, then something like Imperial is very famous for this. And so consider what faculties are famous around the world. That's something else you should look at. Think about the location of the university itself. And so I would say there are 2 types of university really available in the UK. So the first type is something called a campus university. And a campus university would be a big, beautiful building, often maybe quite old, sort of Harry Potter style, lots of green grass everywhere, lots of trees, maybe some horses around, but usually they are far away from a city centre. Okay, so not so convenient. The other type of university would be like a city-based uni. And so maybe not as big, maybe not as beautiful, maybe not as much green stuff, but they are located either in or right on the edge of a city centre. And so much more convenient. Okay, so think about which type of location you prefer in that respect. You must also consider the teaching style of the university. And so you can get something called PBL courses, problem-based learning courses, or subject-based courses, which are more traditional lecture-based courses. As a general rule, PBL courses will cost more in tuition than subject-based courses, just because the university has to invest in specific facilities for PBL courses. But think about this. Think about the entry requirements. And so some universities and some courses, there will be additional things that you have to complete, such as entrance exams or aptitude tests. Be realistic, okay, when considering this. Really ask yourself, can you be bothered to actually put in the additional work to prepare for these entrance exams? And if you think you're truly actually capable of passing these entrance exams, okay, be realistic. Ask yourself, what are top universities looking for? They're basically looking for students with a proven academic ability, a real interest in that subject area, and of course, your potential for the future. Next slide. Okay, so what you should not consider is just the general overall ranking. This is very much an international student thing. So UK domestic students do not focus on the overall general ranking as much as international students do. And certainly with rankings, a lot of rankings are weighed by research. So research does count heavily towards that. And that's not really relevant for students and student experience. And so I think it's not too important, general ranking, when making a decision. Okay, don't just focus on the brand or the marketing of the university or what your friend said, because what is good for your friend is not necessarily good for you. And so you have to make an informed decision about the degree that you're studying at the best university in the most appropriate city that suits you. And the best way to help you decide that is honestly to attend open days and masterclasses, which are always available by universities. But of course, I accept the only way you can really attend open days is if you're already in the UK, right? Having said that, a lot of universities now, if not every single university, because of the current global situation, I think all of them will have virtual open days available online. And so it's worth attending these open days to help you with your decision making. Okay, so tip number 3, reading ahead. Okay, so if you do get an interview for a top ranking university, then you need to remember that interviewers, they've dedicated literally their entire life to their subject area. That's all they've ever done, and it's all they will ever do. And so they will be extremely passionate about research, and they will expect you to be the same. And so it's really important that you read books related to your subject area. And it's much, much better to have read just one book and be able to talk about that in a lot of detail than to have read 20 books and not really to be able to talk about all of them. Now, the important thing about reading is that you do not just repeat the information that is written in the book. That is no good. So one thing that's super important for any university in the UK, but certainly for top ranking universities, is critical thinking. You must be able to analyze the information that you read in the book and then critique it, okay? Come up with your own ideas. You do not necessarily have to agree with what is written in the book, but you must explain the reasons why, okay? And so you must be willing and able to enter a discussion to argue your points. That's very, very important. Okay, so for anybody interested in medicine, if you do get invited along for a medical interview, they're going to mostly ask you about scientific and biological medical related questions. And so it's very important that you know all of the major issues related to healthcare in the news, both globally and in the UK, assuming that you are at a UK university having an interview, right? And like I say, you have to be able to argue points clearly, both for and against. Okay, that's very, very important. And certainly with regards to reading for medical students, it's very common for students to read journals called The Lancet or the BMJ, the British Medical Journal. You've got to read about the course at each university, okay? And so choose the right program for you. I've already mentioned this. And so for medicine, there's different teaching styles. So PBL, like I've mentioned before, problem-based learning, traditional, which is more lecture-based, or integrated, which is a mix of the two. Interviews, there are 2 types of interview, and I will talk more about this later. So the first one is called MMI, which stands for multi-mini interviews. And the second one are traditional interviews, just your standard interviews. I'll go more into detail about this later. Now, if you are interested in medicine, you really, really should have a look at this website. This website is very, very important, okay? And so I'm going to try and show you this website. Hiroshi, can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure that you can actually see this website, or if I have to share my screen differently. I might have to share my screen differently.
Okay, I'll let you know if I can hear.
Thank you. So can you see my website, or can you just see my PPT?
I can still see the same screen.
We can only see your presentation at the moment,
Yeah.
Andy. Actually.
That's okay. Thank you for that. I will change it to this. Can you see my, can you see an internet browser now?
No, unfortunately, still just the presentation. Oh, wait,
right.
now we do, yes.
Okay, so my internet in my house is terrible, so there's always going to be a bit of a lag. Okay, so this website, if you're interested in medicine, look at it, right? It's really, really useful. And it basically allows you to compare medical schools. And so I'm just going to choose 4 for the sake of choosing 4. I'm going to choose Cambridge. Why not? Because it's famous. I'm going to choose Oxford. Why not? Just because it's Oxford. I am going to choose Nottingham because that's where I was born in the UK. In case you're wondering why I've got like a weird Asian Japanesey face, but I'm speaking English, it's because my parents are from Hong Kong, but I was born in England. I was born in Nottingham and I grew up there, went to school there, but I went to university in Newcastle. So that's going to be my fourth choice. But I left the UK maybe about 11 years ago now. And now I am based in Asia for work. And so chosen 4 universities, let's press compare. And so take a little bit of time to load because my internet is so bad. And then this gives you lots and lots of useful information. It will give you phone numbers, emails. It will tell you about the course structure. So you can see Cambridge and Oxford are very traditional. No surprise there. Nottingham and Newcastle will have an integrated delivery. It gives you an idea of the competition that you have, okay? So the applications it gets per annum and so forth, and the applications per place. The ratio, whether or not graduate entry is available. It will give you information about the A-level subjects you must study for each university. Really, really useful information. It will tell you about whether or not you do UCAT or BMAT as the aptitude test, because you will need to do that for medicine. It will tell you about the interview style, whether it's traditional or MMI, and perhaps most importantly, it will give you information about the fees, okay? And so if you are interested in studying medicine, please do look at this website. It's super, super important. And now I will go back to sharing my PPT, which should hopefully work. Okay, so bring this back up. Can I choose? Oh, maybe I've shared the wrong screen here. Sorry, I need to change this again. I really should get better with the old Zoom because I've had enough time to actually get used to this. My apologies, sorry. I've accidentally closed down my PPT. And so this is just another example of how I need to get better with the old technology. If you just give me 1 second, I'm just loading it up again. Right, so I need to get back to the right slide. Research or university, reading ahead. Boop, right, and so I will try sharing my screen again. Hopefully this will actually work this time. Share screen, boop, share. And so Hiroshi or Mike, can you just confirm with me that you can see my PPT again, okay?
Yes, we can now. It's showing
Wonderful. Fine. Thank you. And so I'll make this big. Excellent. Okay, so tip number 4, extracurricular activities and work experience. Again, very, very important. So honestly, universities in the West or universities in the UK are kind of the opposite of universities in Asia in many, many ways, whereby universities in Asia will focus on academic ability and academic achievements of the students, whereas universities in the UK, to get into a top ranking university, top grades alone are simply not enough. Okay, you've got to remember that universities, they are communities. And so therefore they want students who can contribute to that community. Therefore, it's really important that you demonstrate a range of interests outside of study. Okay, you can't just go to school and then play computer games after your lessons. Think about your contribution to school life. Explain why it's significant, explain why it's relevant to what you're studying. Now, you've got to basically demonstrate that you've done your research, you've done your homework about the university, about the course that you're studying, and you have to prove your commitment to that university. And so things like work experience or work shadowing will be essential for some courses, particularly for something like medicine, dentistry, vet science, okay? Or even things like physiotherapy, things like this. You must keep a diary if you do anything related to work or work shadowing. That's very, very important. And on that diary, you've got to write about things like your influences, your learning outcomes. You've got to think about what you learned on your work shadowing or on your work experience, your work placement, okay? So do not just write a list of what you saw. That's no good. They don't want to see that. They want to know about what you learned. So what you found surprising, what you liked, what you disliked, what you found difficult, okay? And so keep a note of all of these things. Now, remember, work experience is hard to get. And so you've got to prepare for evening and weekend work now, and you've got to be willing and able to find this yourself. I'm not really aware of any schools, or if there are, I think there'll be very, very few schools in the UK who will actually find work placements for you. And so what most schools will do is they will help you. They will give you some advice. They will give you some guidance. They may give you some email addresses or some phone numbers, but usually students will have to actually find these themselves. Now, honestly, now, because of the current global situation, it may be more difficult getting work experience. And so I think universities do recognize this. Medical students, like I mentioned, it's really essential that you do some sort of work experience to ensure that you have done your research and that you really know what you're getting into when it comes to things like medicine, dentistry, vet science. It will be almost impossible now to get work experience in a hospital because of COVID. And so alternative options that you could consider is that there are quite a lot of sort of virtual internships available at the moment online, okay, for medical students. Of course, any virtual internship will not be the same thing as a real face-to-face internship, but you have to adapt to the current situation. And so I would recommend that you consider these options during a global pandemic. I don't think you've got much choice, to be honest with you. Think about developing your skills. Okay, so these are the skills that you really want to demonstrate on your personal statement and at interview. Things like your leadership skills, your communication skills. You have to demonstrate a work social life balance. Remember, top universities in the UK do not want students who only study. Okay, demonstrate your dedication and your enthusiasm, your time management skills, teamwork, how mature you are and how responsible you are, okay? Think about the sort of clubs and societies you are members of in your current school, any extracurricular things you do outside of school, any hobbies you do, part-time work, that kind of thing, and how it demonstrates certain characteristics which you can write about on your personal statement and talk about at interview. Very, very important. So the personal statement, so I've mentioned this briefly. Okay, so I'm not sure if you know how it works in the UK, but all applicants to UK universities have to complete something called a UCAS application. And so this is different to applying, for example, in the USA or Australia, where you would actually apply to universities individually. I think that's actually quite a lot more complicated because different universities will have different entry requirements in terms of paperwork and processes and so forth. In the UK, you just do one application and you would choose 5 universities on that application, right? And so on the UCAS application form, you would put down your 5 choices, your personal details. There will be an academic reference from the school, plus the personal statement, which is a 1-page relevant autobiography, max 4,000 characters long. You've got to remember that admission tutors, they're very, very busy people. And so it's got to be relevant and it must cover any relevant work experience that you've done. So this is one thing that you must also remember, very important. So you will only write one personal statement for all 5 applications. Therefore, it's extremely important that you choose similar subjects as your 5 options, okay? So the point is, you cannot choose, say, for example, 3 options which are, say, let's just say 3 options as business and then 2 options as law. And so your personal statement will be focusing on business. And so the 2 universities that you apply to for law will read your personal statement and think, what are you talking about? You're talking about business here, but you've applied to law at our university. They'll just throw your application in the bin. And so therefore choose similar subjects only on your UCAS application form. Here's a pro tip for you. Okay, joint honors programs are much easier to get into than single honors. So for example, if you want to go study at, let's just say LSE, then something like maths and economics will offer slightly less competition than something like just economics. Okay, I'm not saying it will be easy to get into maths and economics at LSE, but there is less competition, less applicants for joint honors than single honors. And so that's something to consider. English is, of course, very, very important when writing your personal statement. You've got to do a lot of preparation to write a good personal statement. And if you don't do that preparation, you will simply not get a place at a good university, okay? Think about how you can make a good impression. Okay, so you've got to make yourself sound interesting, bright, mature, eager to learn. Think about the structure. Okay, it's got to be in a logical structure which makes sense and is very concise. The length, remember, you've only got 4,000 characters, which is only 47 lines. Don't try and pack too much in. Don't make it too confusing, I guess. It's got to be relevant. Everything has to be relevant, okay? And explain why each point is relevant to your application. Don't repeat information on there. Of course, be honest, right? Only write about what you can talk at interview, because universities will use your personal statement as a source of questions. Make sure your spelling is accurate. That kind of goes without saying, to be honest with you. And so the UCAS form online, it does not have a spell check. Okay, and so I would recommend that you actually start writing your personal statement onto a Word document, because that does have a spell check. But remember that spell check is not always accurate. And so you must get it proofread several times, to be honest with you. And once it's good to go, you can copy and paste it into the UCAS application form. Okay, and so remember, your PS is used as a source of questions at interview. And so if there's something that you're very confident talking about, then you can place a lead in your personal statement by mentioning it in your personal statement. And then the interviewers will likely ask you about this during interview. We recommend that you follow this code, follow the 5-paragraph principle. So paragraph 1, your introduction. 2, talk about your chosen subject area and your A-levels. 3, your work experience and any wider reading that you've done. 4, extracurricular activities. 5, closing statement. Now, often the hardest thing for students to write is actually the introduction, okay? Because you want to make it catchy, you want to make a good impression. And so don't be afraid to leave the introduction until last. A lot of students do this, and then often one night when they're falling asleep, you know, suddenly a great opening sentence will suddenly appear in their mind, and they know how to start paragraph 1. And so, yeah, don't be afraid to leave that until last. We do recommend this code in terms of structure. Number 6, know your stats. Okay, so let's just talk about Oxford and Cambridge in the first instance, because these are the #1 universities. And so every single year for Oxford and Cambridge, around 33,000 straight A students will apply for just 6,500 places. And so that means every single year, around 26,500 straight A students are rejected every single year. And when I say straight A, these guys are straight A all the way, as in they have achieved 10 A's or 10 A stars at GCSE, middle school level, and they are predicted 3 A stars on A levels, right? So there are 26,500 of these straight A students rejected by Oxbridge every single year. Top grades alone are not enough. As a general rule, remember the ratio 15:1. So really for any good university, you will have around 15 applications for every 1 place available at that university. So just as an example, LSE, very famous for economics. Each year, they will get around 3,500 applicants for just 210 places. Oxford, economics and management, they get about 3,000 applicants for just 87 places. Imperial, they get over 2,200 applicants for 277 places. Cambridge, 3,500 applicants for 300 places. So you can see there's a lot of competition applying to these famous universities. Now, remember, Oxford and Cambridge, they are made up of something called the collegiate system, the very old-fashioned system. And there are 75 different colleges between Oxford and Cambridge. And each college operates independently. And so therefore, entry requirements will vary between these colleges. Now, you cannot apply to both Oxford and Cambridge. You must only choose one on your UCAS application. And the deadline for Oxford and Cambridge is earlier than other universities. And so your application deadline for Oxbridge is mid-October, whereas for other universities, it is mid-January. Okay, so these are the colleges which make up Cambridge University. You can see there's lots of different colleges there. And these are the colleges which make up Oxford University. You can see lots of different colleges there. Oh, sorry, went a bit too quick there. Now, the richest colleges attract the most competition. And so for Oxford, that's St. John's. And for Cambridge, that is Trinity. And of course, there are some subjects which are way more competitive than others. This just gives you an example, okay? And so actually this information is a little bit out of date now. It's a few years old, but nevertheless, it will give you an idea. So for example, at Cambridge, in King's, previously, they got about 5.8 applications for every 1 maths place. But then in Newham, they got less than 1 application for every 1 maths place. At Queen's, previously, they had over 16 applications for every 1 economics place. But then Trinity, which is still Cambridge University, they got 5.7 applications for every 1 economics place. Oxford, so PPE, that is politics, philosophy, and economics. It's actually quite a popular subject for UK domestic students to study, less popular for internationals because you've got to be very, very good at English and just generally very, very good to do PPE. But overall, previously, Oxford had an average of 3.2 applicants for every 1 PPE place. But then if you started breaking it down by colleges, Balliol had 5.5, Keble and Pembroke 2.7, Mansfield only 1.8. And so look, the point that I'm trying to make really is that different colleges have different amounts of competition. Stats do change every year. And so these stats are not reliable, okay? But it's good to have some idea of the stats when applying. Now, if you are interested in medicine, then one thing you must remember is that there are always limited places available for international students on medical programs. It's just to do with how it's funded, basically. And so medicine, of course, is a very, very competitive course to get onto anyway. And so Oxford, they would get over 1,700 applications for just 154 places. Cambridge, 1,474 for just 265 places. Newcastle, very popular. They get over 3,400 applications for 367 places, and just 26 of those places are for international students. Nottingham, 2,200 applications for just over 200 places, and only 25 of those places are international. Okay, so if you do choose Oxford or Cambridge, don't just pick the college that is the most famous college, because you may have a better chance of getting into another college. And so you should consider colleges that are maybe slightly out of the town center, or maybe they are more new. But like I've said before, do be careful because the stats change every single year. And so the stats I've just given you, they're not reliable, but they do give you an idea about what to think about and things to consider when making applications. Another thing to think about as well, if you're interested in medicine, is that Oxbridge, they tend to produce very academic doctors who have a passion for research, okay? They want to advance medicine. And so if what you want to specialize in eventually is like become a GP, Oxbridge is maybe not appropriate for you. English, okay, tip number 7, English, very, very important indeed. And so this is probably the most single important factor for international students to be successful studying in the UK. All of it is important, but I would say writing is the most important thing for your studies. Unfortunately, writing, in my opinion, is also probably the most difficult part of English, but I think it is the most important part. But having said that, all of it is important. Listening and reading is inputting information. And so it's very easy for you to practice that on your own. And so when it comes to listening, I would recommend that you listen to the radio. Okay, so listen to BBC Radio 4 or BBC Radio 5, because there's a lot of talking on those channels. Reading, honestly, read anything. It doesn't really matter. And so you can read, books, magazines, newspapers, internet. It's all good. Writing and speaking, that's output. And so you can't really do that on your own, unfortunately. You will need a teacher, or you will need to attend some sort of English language school to practice your writing and speaking. If you're going to do something on your own, I would recommend reading is the best way to improve. But what's very important is this. You should have a book when you read, as in an empty notebook, and you should write down any words you do not understand into that notebook and look it up in a dictionary. Okay, and so by reading and by doing this, you will improve your vocabulary, you will improve your grammar, you will understand how to construct a sentence correctly. It's a word called syntax, which is sentence construction. It will just help your English a lot. Reading is great. One thing that's very important is if the only thing you do is attend English lessons and do nothing else outside of those lessons, well, I can tell you that is not enough to improve your English. To really improve your English, you have to do work outside of lessons, and you have to do work on your own. That's very, very important. Now, this is something which frustrates me quite a lot, okay? And so one thing that you must remember as well is that having a good IELTS score is not necessarily the same thing as having good English ability, right? This is very, very important. And so that might confuse you. Well, what do I mean by that? Okay, so there are many, many students who will just focus on IELTS examination techniques in order to get a higher score on the IELTS test, right? And so a student who is only focused on learning the little IELTS tricks and the tips and the examination techniques, they will always struggle when they arrive in the UK because they've only learned the little tips and tricks to get a higher IELTS score. They haven't actually taken the time to learn real English. And so it's really important for students to actually learn real English, not just the IELTS examination techniques. I mean, both things are really important because I think it will be almost impossible for students to get a really good IELTS score without having IELTS training. I honestly don't think it will be possible. So you do need the IELTS training. However, what's also really important is that you also go to a general English language school, not an IELTS training center, but a general English language school. And in Japan, take your pick. There are many, many general English language training schools. And so it's important that you do both IELTS training plus real English. Now, in my opinion, it will take an average student about 1 academic year, which is 9 months long, to improve by 1.0 IELTS. I think that's realistic in terms of improvement. Some students will do it quicker. Some students would do it slower. But I think that's an accurate guide. I think 1 academic year equals about 1 IELTS. Okay, number 8, prepare for admissions tests early. Okay, so for Oxbridge, a lot of their courses require an admissions test. And often this test is set at a higher standard than A-levels or high school level, okay? And so these will not be easy tests. And for certain courses, aptitude tests are required, not just at Oxbridge, but just for certain courses, such as medicine, dentistry, law, and so forth. And the most well-known aptitude tests, in my opinion, certainly in the UK, are UCAT, BMAT, and LNAT, which is usually used for law. Now, you have to remember that different aptitude tests have different formats. And so UCAT and BMAT, they are used for medicine or science-based courses. And actually, they do differ quite a lot. And so UCAT has 5 sections. All of them are multiple choice. BMAT has just 3 sections. There's verbal reasoning questions, science and maths, and then there is a written essay. BMAT is considered generally more similar to A-level, so kind of a bit more traditional, I guess, in its sort of examination technique, whereas UCAT is a lot more unique and abstract. Okay, it's a bit unusual. It's not standard, I guess, is how I would describe abstract. Please remember that these aptitude tests, they are not a test of medical knowledge, right? And it's actually quite difficult to revise for aptitude tests. You cannot revise for an aptitude test like you would do a normal exam in school, because a normal exam in school is often a test of memory and you just kind of remember things, but aptitude tests are not like this. Aptitude tests, they are not a test of memory and they are not an IQ test. They are a test of your ability to understand and interpret information and to analyze information and to draw conclusions from the information provided to you. Of course, there will be some academic content and some questions included. The best way, in fact, the only way you can really prepare for aptitude tests is via past papers. And there will be some past papers available online. I'm sure there'll be some centers which will help you prepare for this. And I'm sure that there are books that you can buy to prepare for UMAT, BMAT, LNAT, all of these things, okay? But try and get your hands on past papers. Certainly for our students at MPW, of course, we will help them with all of this preparation if they come and study A-levels with us. And we would recommend that you start practicing these tests a few months in advance of the real thing. Number 9, the interview, the big thing. Sorry, the reason why I keep wiping myself with a towel is because I cannot turn on my air conditioning in this room because it's a really old air conditioning unit. And so it's super, super loud. And so I have to sit here and suffer in sweaty silence. Never mind. Well, not sweaty silence, in a sweaty webinar, I guess. Okay, interviews. So interviews, this is a good thing. If you're invited along for an interview, It is a good thing. So a lot of students are very nervous when they are asked along for an interview. You should not look at it that way, because the interview levels the playing field. So you've got to remember that a university would not ask you along for an interview unless they thought that you are potentially suitable to study that course at that university. Okay, so when you are invited along for an interview, everything else doesn't really matter at that point. Your background, your UCAS statement, your personal statement, your predicted grades, your previous academic performance, none of that is so important, because the university considered you potentially suitable, right? And so then it's how you come across in interview, which is what matters. And so therefore it does level the playing field. Now, as a general rule, Cambridge University tend to interview more students than Oxford University do. But it does change every single year, but this is true as a general rule. And so generally, Cambridge may interview around 75% of applicants. Oxford may interview around 50% of applicants. It does change according to course and according to year, but that's just a general guide, okay? The personal statement, like I mentioned, will be the source of many questions at interview. We have it where our students, MPW students, they've come back from an Oxford or Cambridge interview and they've said to their personal tutor, oh my goodness, that interview was so difficult. They were so rude. They were so rude to me. They were really horrible. That's actually quite a good sign, because if they like your UCAS application, if they like your personal statement, then be prepared for a difficult time, right? They are not going to give you an easy interview. If they like you, they're going to test you, they're going to push you, right? And so often when students come back saying, oh, I didn't do so well, that was such a difficult interview, they were really horrible, actually a lot of those students actually end up getting an offer afterwards. They're pushing you, they're testing you, okay? Because you are applying to certainly two of the most famous universities in the entire world. And so they want the strongest of strongest students studying there. Practice, practice, practice for an interview. It will make you less nervous. You've only got one chance to make a good impression. You've got to do a lot of preparation. Okay, so that means reading widely around your discipline. Okay, talk to other teachers and other students. Be prepared to be discursive during the interview. That's a good word, discursive. I think most UK people won't even know what that means. Discursive means changing subject suddenly and randomly. Okay, so interviewers will do that. Always try to establish during your interview why you will be an outstanding student, and so how you will contribute to the college life and what makes you stand out from the other applicants. These are some very, very standard interview questions asked at many universities for many different courses. And so I would certainly recommend that you prepare answers to all of these questions. It's just good practice to do this. And so very, very standard questions would include, why did you choose this subject? Why did you choose this university? Don't just say because it's #1 ranking. That's a terrible answer. You've got to do your homework about that university, what it specializes in. Do they have any famous professors or academics there in your certain subject area? Think about things like this. Why did you choose your A-level subjects? What did you read on the train, assuming you had to get a train to that university interview? What can you bring to the university? What are your weaknesses? There's a difficult trick question for you. What work experience have you done? What did it teach you? Remember, it's about what you learned, not what you saw. What do you see yourself doing after university? What achievement are you most proud of? Why should we offer you a place? Now, some top ranking universities will ask you some very difficult questions, okay? And so some questions that our students have, we had a law student, MPW law, and they were asked, do you think you're clever at a university? All right, that's a difficult question. I actually thought he gave a very good answer. Economics, how much money is there in the world? Okay, and so there is no right answer, there's no wrong answer for a lot of these questions. They are testing how you think. And so, for example, if you do get asked this question, don't sit there and try and work out how much money there is in the world. You know, all right, so the largest country in the world is China, population of like 1.2 billion, and then the next one is India, maybe 1 billion, their GDP is this, blah, blah, blah. No, that shows a very linear way of thinking, and places like Oxford and Cambridge do not want that. They want people who can think laterally, okay, outside of the box. If you get asked a question like that, don't be afraid to kind of throw it back in their face. you could say, well, that's an impossible question to answer unless you define what is money. What is money? Does that include assets? Does it include property, land? Does it include stocks, equity, shares? In some countries, animals are used as currency. So things like chickens, goats, horses, whatever, does that count as money? You know, and so don't be afraid to question things. Don't be afraid to throw things back in their face, okay? So one of our engineering students was asked this, what are the fundamental differences between engineering and physics? Okay, he was asked this, actually, it wasn't that long ago. I think I know the answer to that, I think. And so my understanding, let's test myself here. And so my understanding is that physics, they basically are the laws which govern how the world works, and engineering is where you take those laws and apply them to solve a problem. Okay, so whilst there is definite overlap and they are definitely related, the two things are different. Should someone sell their kidney? Okay, so this was actually asked to one of our students when they went along for a medical interview. For me, I guess if it's enough money to retire, I would consider selling my kidney, I guess. And this is the final question was asked to one of our students, a medical student, about 1 in 4 deaths in the UK is due to some form of cancer. Yet in the Philippines, the figure is 1 in 10. What are the reasons? Now, I would not necessarily expect you to know the answer to that now. You would know the answer to that through reading. This is why reading is super important. Now, I do happen to know the answer to this. And so the Philippines is considered a developing country, whereas the UK is considered a developed country. And so actually the mortality rates in the Philippines are actually much higher at a much younger age compared to the UK. It's just that the reasons for mortality are different. It could be, for example, for trauma or for other reasons. Okay, tip number 10, hard work and sacrifice. Okay, so honestly, a lot of students, they do want to go to these top ranking universities simply because they're top ranking. Remember, please do not choose your university based on ranking alone. Please consider the other factors that I talked about. But how do you tell if you are actually suitable for a university such as Oxbridge? Okay, so number one, you must be on track for top grades. I'm talking about top A-level grades, but I'm really saying that you have got top grades in everything you have ever done in middle school and in high school, right? And if you are not getting top grades in everything you have ever done, then maybe you are not actually suitable for Oxbridge because they don't like students with any type of weakness. Okay, so you've got to be getting top grades throughout your education. That's point number one for sure. You work obsessively. Is this something you actually enjoy doing? Do you do it yourself? Are you self-motivated? Or do you need your parents or your teacher to tell you what to do, right? But if you work obsessively on your own, that's a pretty good sign. You like a good academic debate. Remember, Oxbridge, tutorials, supervision, small classes. You've got to be prepared to enter discussion. And so if you like a good academic debate, that tells me that you could be suitable for Oxford. You absorb pressure well. If you do not take pressure well, if you are struggling now in school, that is not a good sign. You've got to work very independently at any good university. And so you're happy with what's called self-directed study. And also, if you're after somewhere relatively small and close-knit, because remember, Oxbridge, they have the collegiate system. Now, if you are the type of student who expects their parents, their agent, their school to basically do everything for you, right? And reconsider Oxbridge, because that tells me that you are not really an Oxbridge caliber student. At least 2 years of outstanding preparation is required to enter any top university, really, not just Oxbridge. Reading takes a long time. It's hard work, especially if you are reading books not in your native language. Work experience requires a lot of research, a lot of persistence. It's not easy to get, especially nowadays. And so it's really, really important that students have a lot of initiative. Initiative is where they're able to do things themselves without being told to do these things, and they must be extremely committed. If you lack initiative and you lack commitment, it's a problem. That basically tells me that you are not suitable, not just for Oxbridge, but really any Russell Group university. the final thing that I will say is, look, you know, I don't wish to scare you with all the stats and numbers that I've given. You have a chance, right? You have a chance. And so, again, this is slightly old, but I think they've changed this now, but I think this nevertheless gives you a good guide. And so students from private or independent schools will get around 45% of places at Oxbridge. I think that's changed slightly now because the government is trying to change that, but previously that was definitely correct. However, in the UK, only 9% of students are actually educated in private or independent schools. And so what that basically meant is 9% of students got 45% of the places, right? And so certainly by coming to a school like MPW, it will give you a decent chance of getting into a top ranking university because we will give you all of the help and preparation required. I will just quickly talk about MPW really towards the end of this PPT. So I work for a group of schools called MPW, and we have 3 campuses in the UK. So one is in Cambridge, famous for Cambridge University, a small, quiet, very pretty Harry Potter-like city. London, of course, the capital city. Birmingham. Birmingham is like the #2 city in the UK. And so if London is like Tokyo, I guess Birmingham will be like Osaka. And we are high schools. The minimum age we can accept is 14. We can accept slightly older students up to age 25 or 26 as well. And they would study in a separate mature group. But we offer high school programs such as GCSEs, A-levels, and foundation. We've got 3 foundation programs: the University of London Foundation, NC-UK Foundation, and the MPW Foundation. Just some information about MPW. Okay, so we are mostly UK students. On average, we are around 70% British students, 30% international. Very unusual, with relatively few students from mainland China. Very, very unusual that. And so it's a really, really good balanced nationality mix. Very hard to find nowadays. We have small class sizes. And so for GCSEs and A-levels, we have maximum class sizes of 9 students per class. The average class size is only 6 or 7 per class, but it will not go above 9. That is guaranteed. Okay, 92% of our students will achieve their first choice university. We are particularly famous in the UK for preparing students to go onto the competitive programs. And so we're very, very well known for medical preparation, for example. So last year in 2019, we successfully sent 49 students to study medicine, dentistry, and vet science. 2020, we successfully sent 53 students to study medicine, dentistry, and vet science. I am not aware of any other school in the UK that sends to medicine, dentistry, vet science in that volume. Maybe they do exist, I'm just not aware of them basically, but we are successful when it comes to preparing students to enter difficult competitive programs. Every year, and so we are very consistent about this, not just in 2020, but every year around 70% of our students will go to either Russell Group or University of London. So most of our students will go to the famous universities. And every year, again, we are consistent, not just in 2020, but every year around a quarter of our students will go to Times top 10 universities. And so this is London, our school, MPW London. It is based in central London, a lovely part of London, Zone 1, South Kensington. Very, very nice, very, very safe. It is close to all of the museums and certain universities like Imperial and so forth. It is our biggest college. We have around 600 students in MPW London. This is our college in Cambridge, okay? Walking distance from the city centre. Cambridge is a beautiful city, around 220 students in our Cambridge campus. And this is our Birmingham campus. Okay, it is in a really, really nice, safe part of Birmingham called Edgbaston. It is close to the shopping centre. I don't think you can really walk to the city centre from where we are, but it's not far away, and it's certainly close to one of the train stations, very, very close to the train station, in fact. But that was my PPT, 10 tips to get into top ranking universities. I hope you found it useful. If you do have any questions, then please feel free to email me. And so I'll be very, very happy to help you with any questions if you are interested in studying A-levels, foundation, or GCSEs at MPW. And my email address is on this final slide here. And so thank you for attending this webinar. I'll pass it back over to Hiroshi now, I think. And so Hiroshi, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, your presentation is very helpful, and I hope I'm sure all the students enjoyed your presentation today.
Thank you. Too kind. Too kind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So actually, it's almost 1 hour. So unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer the questions. But we have one question from a student joining Zoom, saying this student is wondering if it's possible to share this slide with students. Is that possible?
Well, listen, since you were good enough to take the time to attend this webinar, then yeah, what I will do is this, Hiroshi, I will send you a PDF copy of my PPT because the original PowerPoint is just too big to email, but I'll send you a copy and then you can pass it on to any student who has attended this exhibition. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so yeah, so if we get any questions from students in the future, yeah, we are going to get in touch with you. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So listen, I'll be very, very happy to speak to any students one-to-one. Also, if you want to have a chat with a principal or a vice principal from the school, then please just speak to SI-UK and they can arrange everything through myself. It's not a problem at all. Thank you, Hiroshi.
Okay, thank you very much. はい、本日はですね、お忙しい中、MPW のオンラインセミナーにご参加いただきまして、誠にありがとうございました。本日ですね、何かご質問がある場合は、SI-UK の東京オフィス、もしくは大阪オフィスのですね、スタッフの方にメール、もしくはお電話にてですね、お問い合わせいただきましたら、後ほどお返事させていただくことが可能ですので、ぜひお問い合わせいただけたらと思います。またですね、カウンセリング等も無料で行っておりますので、もしご希望であれば、ぜひですね、弊社のホームページより、無料カウンセリングの申し込みをしていただけたらと思いますので、よろしくお願いいたします。本日は誠にありがとうございました。そして最初ですね、ちょっとトラブルが起きてしまいまして、大変申し訳ございませんでした。はい。それではですね、退出ボタンを押して退出をしていただけたらと思いますので、よろしくお願いします。本日はありがとうございました。Mike, you can stop.
Stop sharing?
All right, it is